continuing with a series that we started last month, working with a book called Why Buddhism Is True, The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment by Robert Wright. And we left off 2 weeks ago talking about what I think is one of the more difficult concepts in Buddhism, which is this idea of no self, or that our sense of self is in some ways an illusion. It's a real challenge for our Western culture because over here we've developed a very strong sense of the rugged individual, right? The strong sense of personal identity. We're constantly making reference to a self-entity as if it's something separate from us. We say things like, my body, this is my hand, my thoughts, my memories, my feelings, and so on and so forth. But when we go looking for the me, the self that has those other things, we don't find a separate entity, do we? Same thing when we go looking for the thinker behind our thoughts. There's nothing there. And neuroscience agrees. Current research in neuroscience, they use an MRI. They look at the brain when different things are going on. And what they find is that there is no one single location that is running the show at different times when we're engaged in different activities. So in the book, in response to this difficult concept, the author has some really practical advice for those of us who might be interested in Buddhism but who find the idea of no self to be challenging. His advice essentially is ease into it. Don't get too hung up on it. Here's what he says. He says, our intuitive conception of the self is misleading at best. We tend to uncritically embrace all kinds of thoughts and feelings as ours, as part of us, when in fact that identification is optional. Recognizing that the identification is optional and learning through meditation how to make the identification less reflexive can reduce suffering. It's a good start. You know, the danger is when we become self-centered to the point of selfishness, and then it interferes with empathy and understanding. That's when things start to go wrong. Our intuitive concept of self can become unhealthy when it becomes something we call egotism. It's sneaky. It can even lurk within our spiritual practice, as our Buddhist friend in the next frame here will show us. So there he is sitting on his cushion, has the great realization, the aha moment. Whoa, the individual ego does not exist. 2 frames later, he says, I'm so freaking enlightened. There it is. And what happened there is actually a good thing. If our friend saw what was happening and actually caught that thought arising and saw it for what it was. Just another thought without necessarily having a thinker, but which again is reinforcing this idea that I'm this separate self-entity. That's how the process of meditation can start chipping away at our automatic identification with thoughts and feelings and creating this out-of-control ego thing. Might make us a little less egotistical. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose, just a little less egotism in the world, I think, could make a huge difference. So that's our review of last time. Today we're going to move on to a topic that's closely related, the Buddhist concept of emptiness, which is another, in my opinion, profound but somewhat difficult to understand insight. This is something that the Buddha realized on his path to enlightenment, and again, it's something we tend to have some difficulty with over here. Chapter 12 of the book talks about emptiness, and I love the title that he uses. The title is A Weedless World. A Weedless World. The author is, in that chapter, describing what happened to him while he was on a walk in the woods when he was away at a meditation retreat. He tells us that on this walk, he ran into an old enemy. This guy. That's Plantago major, commonly known as the plantain weed. When he saw it, he remembered the years that he spent battling this weed in his yard or his garden or wherever it was, and he recounted the level of hostility that he generated in the process. Anyone ever go to war with weeds? Anyone ever go to war with weeds? Any of you ever find yourself on the losing side like this guy? But you see, this time was different. This walk in the woods was different. The hostility was gone. He had encountered Plantago major in a natural wild habitat after he had spent several days in meditation. Do you think that made a difference? Probably. It looked different to him this time, and he started thinking to himself, what exactly is it about this plant that is so dastardly evil that it deserved my hostility and contempt? And for the first time, he recalled being struck by the beauty of the plant. Why was this plant a weed while nearby similar looking plants were not? For example, this is a weed. All right, next one. This is a flower. Go figure. The first one is a dandelion. We put poison on them. The second one we call a marigold, and we plant them and we fertilize them. Is there something intrinsic in that dandelion, some metaphysical, essential, platonic, ideal quality that makes it a weed? Is there some essential weedy quality that makes it different from the marigold? Is there an essence of weediness that we can identify in the dandelion that makes it undesirable? And is there some essence of flowerness that makes the marigold something to be valued? The Buddhists don't just say no, they say heck no. This is how it went for the author. He said, why was this green-leafed thing called a weed, whereas other nearby things that fit the same description weren't? I looked at those nearby things and then at the weed and found myself unable to answer the question. There seemed to be no objective visual criteria that distinguished weeds from non-weeds. In retrospect, I guess I would call this my first close brush with the experience of emptiness. It's one of the things he does beautifully in this book is he takes these kind of everyday occurrences to illustrate some really very difficult and deep concepts in Buddhism. It was empty. It was empty in the sense that it did not contain any kind of essence of weediness apart from the way he had learned to think about it. There wasn't anything inherent in the plant itself. It was something he had added to it or imposed upon it. When we perceive weed essence, we want to kill it. And when we don't perceive it, we might want to plant it and water it. We create distinctions that we apply as if they were part of the object itself, and then we end up creating separation. And when that kind of thinking becomes automatic, or reflexive as he likes to put it, well, we start to apply that pattern of thinking to other things as well, which might be trivial when it comes to plants, but what about when we take that same thought process and we apply it to people? Not so trivial anymore, is it? The stakes are much higher at the level of human interaction, and it happens there. Oh, yes, it does. Here's what the author says about it. He says, the moral stakes are the main reason I'm spending so much time on the doctrine of emptiness. At the root of the way we treat people, I think, is the essence we see them as having. So it matters whether these perceptions of essence are really true or whether, as the doctrine of emptiness suggests, they are, in some sense, illusions. There's that word illusion again, and it doesn't mean non-existent. It means not what it seems. Our perception of essence, our perception that something or someone has some kind of inherent essential nature, is due to a combination, once again, of our old friend natural selection and our long-term cultural conditioning. Conditioning at the hands of our culture, our tribe. So what we do is we tend to idealize the attributes and essence of our own tribe, and no other tribe seems to measure up. All those other tribes, our essence don't stink, but all those other tribes out there, all right, they got some kind of essential flaw, right? That tribe over there, all they care about is making money. They're essentially greedy. They'll cheat you if they get the chance because they're essentially greedy. That other tribe over there, they're essentially savages. They'll murder you in your sleep and they'll carry your children off. Those are historical examples, both of which gave rise to genocide. If you can be persuaded that a person or a group is essentially evil, or different from you even, atrocities are likely to follow. And if members of your own tribe engage in that same kind of conduct, you know what happens. It's either ignored, justified, or rationalized, because as we know, there is no essence of weed in any member of my tribe. We're all flowers. Special flowers, mind you. The weeds are over there in that group. That's how it works. So maybe we want to imagine, as the chapter title goes, maybe we want to imagine a weedless world. And the Buddha didn't have to imagine one. He clearly saw it. As the legend goes, at the moment of enlightenment, the Buddha looked out on the world, and instead of seeing hundreds and thousands of different things, he saw just one thing. What that was is subject to slightly different interpretations, but what he saw was that there's no basis for separating things into weeds and flowers. Under one set of circumstances, we may want to remove the plant. Under another set of circumstances, we may preserve the plant. Roses can be invasive. Have you ever seen an invasive rose take over a bed? If you let it go, they'll get out of control. And a whole bed of dandelions can actually be quite beautiful. Stop the black and white thinking and consider context, conditions, circumstances. That's one of the greatest and most underused gifts of human consciousness. That was the Buddha's great awakening. And he saw that all conscious beings have the same potential if they learn how to develop it. So after that, the Buddha went on to develop a system of practice, part of which involved meditation to help us with this problem of trying to see essences and essential natures in things. This is how Robert Wright describes how meditation helps with that. He says, after all, one virtue of mindfulness meditation is that experiencing your feelings with care and clarity, rather than following them reflexively and uncritically, lets you choose which ones to follow, like, say, joy, delight, and love. And this selective engagement with feelings, this weakened obedience to them, can in principle include the feelings that shape the essence we see in things and people. Ideally, the essence we want to see is no essence. Emptiness. Emptiness that's filled only with many possibilities, one of which is the ability to wake up and to see clearly instead of getting bogged down in our conditioned way of thinking that only creates and preserves duality and separation. There was an ancient Buddhist teacher, a teacher of Zen Buddhism from the 6th century, who wrote a beautiful and actually quite long poem on this subject. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of verses this morning that I think sums up what we're talking about here. This is called the Faith Mind Sutra. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. So I'll leave you with that till next week, where we'll wrap up our series and then we'll move into Easter. See you then.